all you heroes, hawks, heralds, crows, pirates, and wardens. Welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we unpack, discuss, and galaxy brain about all the lore behind the Dragon Age series.
We are so excited to bring you this podcast. Every episode, we'll be talking about a different topic in the Dragon Age universe. From character deep dives to exalted marches and elven gods, we will cover it all.
There will be spoilers. And always remember, swooping is bad.
Hello and welcome to the Dragon Age Lorecast, where we talk about all things Dragon Age and the lore. I'm one of your hosts, Austin, also known as Teacup, and I'm here with my very lovely co-host.
Wow, I get a lovely today. Cool, thanks. I'm Shelby or Shecup.
And we're here continuing our deep dive on the individual Evanuris series. And today is another god whose name is not how you would say it.
But first, we do have a guest.
But first, we do have a guest with us.
Surprise! I've been here the entire time.
I know, Austin, you just forgot about that to introduce Caitie. But Caitie or Ghil Dirthalen, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me. I've seen you guys around. It's good to finally touch base and attack your show and so just say hello.
Yes, yeah. And I know that you like June, and have some theories about him. And so we'll get into that a little bit later, but I'm really excited for our episode today. So the first thing we always do is we talk about fun facts, trivia, whatever random bits of information that don't fit in everywhere else. So the first thing, everyone, is that this elven god is not pronounced June, even though it's spelled that way. It's actually pronounced June, which, thank you, Caitie, for your YouTube video, because I would not have known. But this is canon lore according to the Dictionary of Terms in the World of Thedas Encyclopedia.
Yeah, it has a helpful thing that says pronounced June, which at this point, like, it's been so long between games, I'm just like totally prepared for the next game to come out. I'm like, oh yes, and the god June, and I just sit there sad, like I look like a crazy person this entire time.
That probably will happen about a lot of things, not just this one. So, you know, it is what it is. But I would love, just as a side note, I would love for BioWare, if they do a World of Thedas Encyclopedia 3, I would love a pronunciation guide. Just generally.
Yes, for everything. If nothing else, just to settle the Arlathan versus Arlathan debate.
Oh my God. That debate is never ending.
You know, we can blame Star Wars for this because when George Lucas made Star Wars, he basically said, say it however you want.
Oh no.
And so we get all of these different things like Leia versus Leia and a bunch of other that I run a Star Wars podcast as well. And so I just always say it is what it is. But I think what George Lucas was trying to do, and maybe what Dragon Age is trying to do, is recreate a realistic world where things are pronounced differently depending on where you are and who's saying it.
So the aluminum versus aluminium debate.
Correct.
But back to the fun facts on June. So I think the most interesting thing is that we know the least about June than we do of any of the other Evanuris. Like, we know so little about him, and even so much as like some of the other elven gods, we know they had a temple. We know it was like in this general area. We don't even know if he had a temple. We can kind of assume, but we have no confirmation of that in the lore. And there are lots and lots of other similar instances of that as well. But interestingly, also, you can on this note, you can find a sword in Inquisition named Evanura, and it was, accordingly to its description, was created by the High Keeper of June. So we can kind of guess, okay, he had a High Keeper, which I'm not really sure what a High Keeper is. We can probably assume that he had priests and priestesses as well. So we're just kind of deducing, yeah, there's probably a temple somewhere too.
And if I'm remembering correctly, the sword Evanura and like the mentions of High Keeper, that also dates back to the Dale. So it's even years after all the gods were locked away too. So we don't know like there's the Dalish beliefs, and then there's what actually ever was reality. So who knows if there really was no, I'm going to call it the cult of June. There really was no cult of June back in the day, but in the modern times, there are people who revered June for whatever reason decided to copy other religions, I suppose, or forms of worship. So who knows if he traditionally even had a high keeper? It's all just up in the air. Who knows?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And also it brings up a good point that we know so little about this. It's very possible that, especially in the time of the Dales, and even probably before, but specifically the time of the Dales, the reverence to these gods, like, it doesn't function as like a polytheistic religion. Like most people are loyal to one of the gods, and like they may acknowledge the other ones, but they don't necessarily worship all of them. They usually pick one. So we just don't know if he actually had a lot of followers or he was just kind of sidelined, which is a little sad to think about. We just don't really know.
Right. And we see that with and I would be curious because in our real history, when we look at Greek and Roman mythology, they had different cults and sects of different gods. And it was rare that like a priestess of Athena or a priest of Athena is not going to revere Poseidon or Hades or any other god more than they do their even god's existence. I think in our largely monotheistic world, the definition of worship in the monotheistic religions is a little different than the polytheistic ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, let's get into what we do know about June, because there are some things. And I know that some of the gods we've talked about so far, like they've only had one name. Well, you would think, since we know so little about June, you'd think he would fall into that category as well. But actually, he does have 3 different kind of titles or names that he has been referred to with, which is God of the Craft, Master of Crafts, and Clever June. And I think also the crafts master, which is very difficult to say, can also be kind of thrown in there. So he does have a few different things. And they kind of all go together. They're all about crafting. And I think Clever June ties into that with, he's clever because he was an inventor of said crafts, which we'll get into later what craft actually means. But for now, let's talk about his roles and relationships within the Evanuris. So, again, we know so little about June that even his role among the Evanuris is debated, as you can probably expect. But there are a few interpretations of his role, which include, number 1, brother to Andriel and Siles. Number 2, husband to Siles, and number 3, that he created himself. And this last part is very interesting to me because we know that Gil was raised into the Evanuris, and there's some interpretation. 2 different codex entries give us 2 kind of varying accounts, whether she was helped by the entire Evanuris, or she was kind of crying out to them and they raised her because she was just that holy. And then we have June, who kind of echoes that solitary being raised, where he created himself. So I think that that's a really interesting parallel. I'm not sure we have any other parallels between June and Ghil, but I do think that's interesting. Do y'all have thoughts about this one?
So I It's one of those things that like I don't really have anything substantial to base it on, but this has always been kind of like where my hunch is and like where my mind is. I've always kind of connected Janae and Gillinan to just kind of be like I think there is like a family, quote unquote, and they're not part of the family. Like they came in, they married in, if you will. That's what I kind of believe. And I think that, Gillinan was raised by Andrul to be a goddess. And I think you could easily use the interpretation that created himself means that he was able to raise himself up into godhood. And so, like, I guess I've always thought of the godhood of the Evanuris having something to do with like killing a Titan in Titan's heart based on like some codex entries in the murals. The codex entry being Korth the Mountain Father, I think it is. And then there's like that mural that you see in Trespasser that you have to go into like the Dwarven Underground, and it has like on either side it has an elven figure with like an orb, and then there's the dying Titan with like a star in the center of its chest, and then on the other side is an elf with that star in it, like holding that star. And I think that's kind of an explanation on where the power of the Evanuris came from, which speaking of, maybe that's actually just Juné. Maybe that's a depiction of Juné killing a Titan. I don't know. So maybe he was just the one to figure out how to get that godhood without the help of the others, or maybe he was the first one to do so. I don't know. Well, you would think actually Elgranon, based on like him being the All Father, would be the first, but because I think he said first of his people, wasn't it? I don't know. It's been a minute.
Yeah, that's fair. I personally really like Elgranon. But anyway, I very much agree with the kind of lens of looking at Gillinan and Juné as like the in-laws. Very much that tracks so much with everything we've given about them in the lore. Like, yeah, they're included, but they're different. Like they're not as good as the rest of us, kind of. Like that's how it reads to me. I don't know if we're reading into it. I mean, I do feel like looking at Dragon Age lore is a little bit like you have to read into it a little bit too much.
Oh, totally.
But no, I think that's absolutely a fair interpretation and is very interesting. Austin, did you have something to add?
Well, and it's interesting to me because they're conflicting there's conflicting information in our actual mythologies on we always assume like the 12 Olympians are the strongest of the Greek gods. And in some interpretations, mainly the Percy Jackson series, but other interpretations, Poseidon, Hades, and Zeus sit on top of the Olympians, and Zeus being the leader and ruler. But it's unclear whether they are equal in power. I think the Evanuris, in what we know at least, set up that Mythal and Elgranon are the strongest, and the other ones are very much pale in comparison in terms of power. Are they just forgotten because they're not the strongest ones or the most popular ones?
It is kind of interesting to think about it. Like, of course, there are way more Greek gods than there are Evanuris, but having that group of the 12 Olympians versus all the rest of them, I guess your comparison would be that Mythal and Elgranon are like the 12 Olympians and the rest of the Evanuris is like the other ones.
Yes, very much so. Like the gods of the winds, like they're minor gods to Zeus. Similar to that.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know, but let's move on a little bit. I think one of the reasons why Juné is somewhat unknowable is because his followers didn't just do one thing. He wasn't just associated with one specific thing. Elgranon is associated with the sun and rage. Those are his things. Juné does not have one thing. They weren't interested in just knowledge or just justice. He had high keepers making swords and knots and blacksmithing and, just lots of different things that they were all doing. And so I think we can make the assumption, giving Juné's name, the god of craft, of course, he's god of crafting of all kinds, which is a very broad dominion. And I am kind of arguing, I think that the broadness of that dominion, even though it encompasses a couple of different, more than a couple, a few different things, it does come close to Mythal and Elgernon in power. And I think we can kind of think of him as a threat to them almost. So I wonder, this is a little bit theorizing, but I wonder if one of the reasons why we have such little information about June is because Mythal and Elgernon were perhaps threatened by him and they actively suppressed his followers and information about him.
Yeah, with Flemeth also being alive and well and doing whatever, and the shards of Mythal, like she very well could easily have twisted history to make June just absolutely obsolete for the most part. Or like, I guess I've always interpreted the June's the god of crafts, because there is a codex entry that we'll kind of get on a little bit later here where it talks about what if June's domain was something unknowable to like modern day society, and that's why it's kind of so broad, because the people who are currently living in Thedas without the veil couldn't do what he was doing anymore, and so it just kind of became like it's like his godhood was stripped away, and like people who worshipped him, like, well, what the fuck do we do now? So kind of doing something like that, and just kind of became splintered, and you have doing different factions doing different things, and it kind of became, you got the people that do the knots, you got people that do the blacksmithing, you got the people that do the puzzles, and all sorts of different nonsense. But
yeah.
And I think like I do a lot of, in this series, I've been doing a lot of comparisons to real world mythologies. And we have this trope again, like Hephaestus is the craftsman of the gods, and he is the god of crafts and blacksmiths and all of that. And he is outcast even from the 12 Olympians. Like he is ugly. And so either Zeus or Hera or whatever throws him off a mountain because he doesn't fit with the image that they want to create. And maybe there's something similar going on, like Shelby said, with June, in that like June creates himself. He ascends to godhood himself without the help of the other Evanuris. And so maybe he is a threat. Maybe he doesn't fit the mold in which their family is putting out. So he, like Hephaestus, is cast out.
And I'm glad you brought up, is it Hephaestus or Hephaestus? I'm not educated.
I've always heard Hephaestus, but
I don't know how to pronounce it either. So let's just go with Hephaestus, since isn't that what they say on Percy Jackson?
Yes, that is what they say on Percy Jackson.
So
and
we'll
I
go
think
with
it's
the
that
Percy Jackson
PH.
pronunciation then.
Yeah. And it's that PH sound that makes that like Hephaestus, I guess.
Hephaestus.
Okay, whatever.
Well, I'm glad you brought Hephaestus up, because I think there's a lot of parallels between him and June, because like June or like Hephaestus, June's married to Selais, and while she's not said to be the most beautiful, she's the very much like the most, I'm going to say, traditional womanly. She's the one that helps with births and childbearing and the hearth keeper, and she's very much like what is traditionally known as feminine arts. And really, Mythal and Andril don't really have that like hyper femininity that Selais really has, and so I think it'd be very easy to say. Oh, and Gillenon. Gillenon was said to be pretty beautiful though, so maybe that's something. But I think you can easily put her and Venus together, or Aphrodite, as kind of a similarity, and I think also with if I'm remembering correctly, Hephaestus had like he would build like ancient Greek moving statues and stuff like that made out of metal. And like that was like a whole situation. And if we don't know what June used to craft, could you say like, oh, he used to craft golems, or that he did something it was similar to that? Because you do see moving statues in the series. What if there's some sort of relation to that? So I don't know. This is me watching Jason and the Argonauts a couple days ago. That's what
No, I think that there is something there, and I think part of the interesting thing about Juné is that they can take this person, this god, in so many different directions in the future.
Mhm.
Like there's so many things that they could build on, like with the golems. However, I can also see fans of Dragon Age, specifically dwarf simps, being really upset if they take another thing and say, oh, actually, this is all about the elves. So,
If I may, though, this isn't my personal theory. I do not personally subscribe to it. However, there are fan theories out there that Juné is actually a dwarf,
mhm.
and he's an ancient dwarf that's somehow gone onto the pantheon. Because I believe the explanation was there is this in-game mural that is seen throughout. Juné's is kind of a weird one. It's hard to see, but it's at least in the game files. And there's something like covering his face, and it's like a different color than all the other faces of the Evanuris. So people are like, oh, he had a beard. He's a little bit shorter, which I think if you look at the lineup, he's not the shortest one. So whatever. And he's doing like traditional Dwarven things. And then the background of him has very geometric designs, where the other designs of the Evanuris are very like wavy and flowy. So what if he was a dwarf? Now I will say, like, that same mural does have elven ears. Rather than dwarven ears, but if you could easily say, like, oh, well, this was built in the Dales and blah 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 blah, I don't know, but so yeah, I don't personally subscribe to the idea. I would find it interesting if they did go that direction. And yeah, Juné did all this dwarven stuff because he was a dwarf and he somehow got on the pantheon.
I think this makes total sense. I'm not saying I subscribe to it, but I think that it would be a fun inversion of like, okay, everything's about the elves. Oh, but actually, here's an example of the dwarves taking over, part of the elven religion. But I do think there is something there. I think that is interesting. It does make everything make a little bit more sense in terms of like craft, because these are all smithing, especially things that are associated with the dwarves. And also, Juné is not a very elven sounding name. It's not frilly. It's very basic. It's very short. It's not something that is... it's not something I would assume to be elven. But also, going back to the mural you brought up, if that turns out to be the case, it wouldn't be the first time in lore that we have a mural depicting someone who is of a different race than is depicted, because we do have evidence of Shartan being depicted in an elven or in a mural in Orlais, and his ears, were made into human ears. Yeah. So it's not that far out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's would even further highlight that the elves were no better than the line is Tevinter in the game, but in this case it'd be Orlais.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, let's get into temples in Valisleen a little bit. So I mentioned this earlier. There are no temples that we know of, but with the Valisleen, so he does have two versions. The complex version is like 3 lines above the eyebrows that then intersect in the middle of the forehead and then continue down the cheeks and across to the mouth, 4 dots under the eyes and 5 dots across the cheeks, and a line on the chin extending down the neck. And then the simple version is just the lines above the eyebrows and then down the cheeks and chin. So that's the Valisleen. Nothing super like crazy like Elgernon's, but just still good to know about. But I think now would be a good time for the mid-break, Austin.
Well, let's head over to the mid-break.
So you like to read? What's wrong with that?
It's frivolous. There are more important things for me to do.
That's just her favorite.
Nobody asked you, Tevinter.
I couldn't finish the last one you lent me. I actually feel dumber for having tried.
It's literature. Smutty literature. Whatever you do, don't tell Varric.
No offense, but might I try? I've got a quick hand, after all. Let's see. Oh, when was the last time I slipped my hand into some dark hole? I remember. Long story, that.
You hurt my head sometimes, Solus.
Yes. I have been known to do that.
So, welcome to the middle of the show where we thank all of our patrons. Thank you to all of our patrons. A special thank you to our first patrons, Lisa M. and Genesis. If you want to support us on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/DALorecast. That link's in the episode description. It's also on our website. You can also just Google Dragon Age Lorecast Patreon, and I bet it would show up. And so, if you want to sign up, you can do that. If you want to come on our patron chats, you can sign up at the first enchanter tier or higher. If you can't support us on Patreon, that's totally fine. We love doing these shows and we love providing them for free to all those who want to listen to them. But a great way to support us is to leave us reviews on Apple or Spotify. We don't have any reviews to read today, so if you have yet to tell us what you think or ask us a question in Spotify comments, go ahead, leave us 5 stars and leave us a comment or question, and we'll read it out on a future episode of the show. Also, you can come hang out with us on Discord and do everything there. We talk about all kinds of stuff like Baldur's Gate and everything else, Dragon Age, Assassin's Creed, all kinds of stuff on that Discord. It is the best place on the internet. So please come and join us and hang out with us there. Other than that, I think that's all I have for the mid break.
Awesome. Well, let's get back into it.
Abominations are always so awkward at family reunions. Have you ever seen an abomination? They are ugly.
Dorian, those words you say, what do they mean?
What, you mean like mendicant? Ultimatum?
No arse when you're mad. Pishanti Kothas. You're swearing, I know it.
Vishanta Kafas. It's Tevin, relics of the old tongue. We still use the colourful phrases.
And it means what?
Literally, you shit on my tongue.
You fear barbarians will swoop down upon you.
Yes, swooping is bad.
All right, so let's talk about the Dalish real quickly, of which it won't be very significant because none of the oldest Dalish depictions of the Evanuris include June, interestingly enough. Or if they do depict him, they do not depict him with the tools of crafting that he has later been associated with. So we can kind of take this to assume his role has changed over the years. Again, we don't exactly know how, but we can say, yes, he's changed in some way. And so I did bring the codex entry for June, just to read some of it, because I think this kind of really explains a little bit about what craft means for the Dalish. So they say this: we dedicate all our crafts to June, for it is he who taught the people to bend the branches of trees to make our bows, and to fashion coverings of furs and ironbark. Without June, would we have the Aravel, or the harnesses for our hala? When the people were young, we wandered the forests without purpose. We drank from the streams and ate the berries and nuts that we could find. We did not hunt, for we had no bows. We wore nothing, for we had no knowledge of spinning or needlecraft. We shivered in the cold nights and went hungry through the winters, when all the world was covered in ice and snow. End quote. So this implies a lot of things. It implies that June gave them fire. It explicitly says he taught them how to make bows, how to make clothing, how to make harnesses, how to hunt, how to, process the things that you've hunted, all of these things. So that's a lot of stuff. Like usually in mythology, you have a god over hunting. You have a god over fire. You have like one person who gives you fire. You have another god over nature. Like they're usually much more separated out. So again, this goes back to my point of like June has a huge domain. This could rival Mythal and Elgranon. Do y'all have thoughts about this codex so far?
Definitely, because I want to point out 2 things. So there's always one god who, like in a lot of pantheons, who just has this big range of followers because their domains that they cover just cover a broad spectrum. Like think about Hermes, the god of travelers. almost every person in their life at one point would be traveling, with maybe some few exceptions or other things. And like again, like with the agriculture thing, like the goddess Demeter, like this is going to be there. What's interesting to me of this is June now has comparisons with two major outcasts of the Greek pantheon, which is Hephaestus and Prometheus. And like Prometheus is the reason, like according to Greek mythology, we as humans would be unthinking slaves to the Olympians if it were not for Prometheus stealing the fire from Olympus and giving it to humanity. Which kind of leads more to theory, like maybe June is this outcast of the Evanuris, maybe even more outcast than say Fen'Harel is.
Whoa, getting crazy on us.
Ooh.
Notice I brought up Fen'Harel and not the other name.
Okay. It will be okay. I was going to say it's interesting. The interesting part of this is the Prometheus reference, of course, because it's also, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Prometheus is also sometimes credited as creating humanity. So we have another reference, possibly implicit reference, where June created himself and Prometheus created humanity. So there's a little bit of a coincidence there too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some other forms of Greek mythology, like Prometheus is related to Pandora.
Interesting.
And so it's very interesting, like that Pandora's box and the giving the fire. Again, all these things that symbolize like humanity taking hold of their own destiny, but are punished in the Greek mythology. Like Prometheus is tied to a rock and vultures feast on his insides for all eternity.
That's gross.
Pleasant.
I think that's interesting that Prometheus is tied with Pandora, because I think you could also potentially make the connection between Gil-Anon and Pandora and all of her creatures.
Yes, very much so.
Mm-hmm.
But I am going to turn the dial down on the Greek mythological comparisons, because we have done a lot of that. So let's get into some Dragon Age theory crafting. But first, I have one more information piece about the Dalish, which is that they do have a little puzzle that they do, like a Rubik's Cube brain teaser kind of thing, that's made out of wood, and it's called June's Knot. It's a mind teaser, like I said, but we have no idea why it's named June's Knot. We just know that it is. I guess you can attribute that to crafting, or maybe something else. Who knows? We don't. But so we're going to go to Dragon Age theory crafting now with just some other thoughts and things that don't fit into our usual kind of outline of information. And before I turn it over to Caitie, I want to talk about something called the Grand Sonalium, which comes from a codex entry, and it's very interesting. I just like titled this "What the Hell Happened in the Grand Sonalium," and it comes from the Codex Virderthara Raising the Sonalium. So I'm just going to read some of the Codex entry and we can kind of talk about it. Yeah. Anyway, so this is what it says. The pages of this book, Memory, describe a heated argument between a group of well-dressed elves inside an elaborately arched pavilion on an island floating in a void. In the distance, haloed by a blizzard of light, thousands of elves are maintaining an elaborate magical ritual that pulls raw essence from the Fade, funneled into a sphere in the air. Through the lens of the sphere can be seen a world of indigo waterfalls and rust-red jungles, and a temple palace so frescoed and cleverly carved it is a masterpiece in itself. The well-dressed elves' shouting grows so loud it can be heard over the magic. One leaps at another, howling and pulling out a knife burning with prismatic flame. Architects of the Grand Sonalium, a gift from Blessed Siles to clever June as thanks for a great favor, in friendly debate over the color of the palace's roof trim.
Very friendly.
Very friendly.
I don't know about you, but I'm constantly getting in knife fights with my friends. It's just
literally every day. Like,
Yeah.
cannot be overstated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. All of the Vir Dirthara codex entries are like, what the hell is happening here?
I love
But
them all.
I do think this one's the most out there.
Not the flower one that the I don't know. I think the flower one's pretty out there.
That's fair. The flower one is crazy.
But like this one, friendly debate with a knife fight. That one's also pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I just want to say that
Mhm.
as a person who does work in a church,
Mm-hmm.
that religious officials or whatever arguing over color of something turning to a violent fight does not seem that far-fetched to me.
Okay, that's fair. That is fair. I have so many thoughts that I have zero thoughts about this. But like in my little questions, I was like, what does it mean? Do we have thoughts? Do we have theories? And the only thing that is in my brain really right now is the Miley Cyrus TikTok sound that's like, what does it mean? Because I don't know what this means. But some of the things that I think are interesting is we have a huge ritual with thousands of elves. So this is clearly happening in the time of Elvenon and Arlathon, or even maybe before, who knows? We have the Fade is involved, which is always a great thing. And we have some interesting like world landscape things where we have purple waterfalls and red jungles, which in my mind are places we haven't been to yet in Dragon Age. So that's interesting. And then it says a temple palace so frescoed and cleverly carved. It's a masterpiece in itself, which I'm reminded, frankly, of the Temple of Mythal. It absolutely easily could be someplace else, but that's what I thought of when I read it first. And then, of course, we have this battle almost where the architects of the Grand Sonalium are fighting one another. But I think the important thing to know about this codex entry is that what's, at least how I'm interpreting it, what's happening in the codex, the fighting, the magical ritual, all of that is happening inside the Grand Sonalium. And the Sonalium is the thing that was the gift from Siles to June. So all of this stuff is happening in that location. I don't know. It's just interesting to me.
Yeah, it's look at every word and have a question. So I guess what I hear all the time is, what is a sonalium? Which the my best guess has always been like something to do with sleep. It just sounds like it would involve sleep, maybe sound. I believe I'm more of the sleep thing, so then that would be something to do with fade walking and doing something like that. And so this like. Then is the question like, okay, did Siles just give June a very pleasant napping area? Is that what this is? Is this like a woman giving her husband a nice couch? Is that what this is?
Yeah.
Thanks for fixing the shelf, honey. I got you a lazy boy. Like, is that what this is?
Yeah.
This is where I get so frustrated because I wish we had like alphabets for each of the languages so that we could see things in, you can tell I've studied languages. We could see things in their original alphabets. So like we could maybe, if there is a connection of sleep, maybe we could see some common characters between Sonalium and Uthenera. Like, you know.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Dragon Age languages, which I'm sure you know if you're familiar with languages, is just a mess.
Mhm.
Like the elven, I mean, it's just a cipher, it's not even a language. And like the something happened with origins. And so I believe Einon Zur, who wrote a lot of the songs from Dragon Age Origins, just like did whatever the fuck he wanted, and there is no rhyme or reason to the lyrics of that song. But then the writers went ahead and actually pulled some of those lyrics to be real words, and they don't always fit. And it's just especially early, it gets really clusterfuck. And don't get me started on Q and Lot. It's just,
Yeah,
Look,
it's all a mess.
yeah.
not everyone can be Tolkien, and I understand that. But if you could
Yeah.
be a little more Tolkien, I would
Mhm.
appreciate it.
But so this codex entry is interesting. We have no idea what it means, but it definitely does reference June and Siles, and that's about all we can kind of guess from this. So let's move into, I know, Caitie, that you have some theories and thoughts that you wanted to share about June, so I'm just going to turn it over to you.
I come in with a bunch of papers that are just extremely messy, and I trip and they fall over the floor, and this is gonna like just be a lot of random nonsense. So I guess I want to jump back to the first point that we talked about is June created himself, and what that could kind of mean. I think like he created himself into godhood is a really good interpretation, but I think we should also bring in is June quote unquote like coal, where he created his body, and that's something that has been theorized but never confirmed. That it's a pretty hard fanon belief that all elves were once spirits that became physical form just by the power of wanting to have physical forms, like Cole did. And so, what if Janae was the one to spearhead that he learned how to create a physical form?
That's really interesting because I actually learned this today. So I was watching this TikTok about elves in D&D because they made me really sad about Asterion, and it's really sad and it's not great. But elves are like they have been like outcast from their paradise, and they are constant elven souls. There's like a set number of them, and they're constantly reincarnated. And so this idea that like all elves were once spirits that have now taken physical form, very reminiscent of D&D.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Yeah. I play elves all the time in D&D, so I'm like, oh shit, I wish I knew that. That'd been cool.
Right. So I learned this because when elves have their trance, they relive their memories in perfect recall. And so when they're younger, before they reach maturity, they actually remember their past lives.
Oh, that's wild.
And so for this is off, but what's so sad about Asterion is that he can't perfectly recall anything except for the trauma under Cazador.
Aw.
Thanks for the downer.
Yeah, man. I've only just started playing. I knew about Cazador and all that situation, but I just started playing Baldur's Gate, and like that's been like going from Dragon Age. This is like, whoo, we're getting a little emotional here. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yes.
Especially since I started out with a dirge run. I'm like, oh, the squirrel, no.
Yikes.
It's been a lot. Anyway, June had a domain that just is unknowable. Like that would be the perfect domain of being made physical. So in the Codex entry, Mystery of June, which in lore is actually a paper from someone from the University of Orlais, which like the name on the paper makes it sound like it's like an elf studying at the university. But they note that June's role may have changed over time or simply cannot be understood today. So like, is that the physical form or was it some unique magic? And I would assume that whatever the original domain was, it would be something that would have like some logical sense as why it would over the years become crafts and all this other stuff. So yeah, even with just like creating a physical form, I can see how that was like, well, June creates, he creates, and that's just what it is, rather than creates the physical form. Or we can link it back to Hephaestus, where he would build like the armor and the weapons of the gods. He create automations and stuff like golems and all that sorts of things. And I don't know, like there is that one codex entry of Andrul having void armor, and that was like made for, even though it kind of like talks about how she made it, so maybe she did, or maybe she commissioned it, or God knows what. But I don't know, like how many of like the weapons and things in the lore actually have him behind it, and he just has this huge magical factory of ancient whatever the fuck, and that just all this big magical thing just kind of got whittled down to I make a hammer, you know.
Yeah. You go ahead, Austin.
Well, I was just gonna say, there's this tendency, like in like human nature, our actual human nature, that in the absence of knowledge, we'll put whatever. Like in the absence of what is actually there, we'll create whatever. But I think it's interesting that because we know so little, I can theorize this. Is not the fade itself like the intangible made physical? Are not spirits just ideas that are out there and not really something you can grasp onto made physical? Perhaps, maybe June is a physical embodiment of the fate itself.
Okay. So like maybe he was always a spirit kind of thing, or he was just like a big mega spirit that had a lot of maybe was able to really manipulate the fade magic better than any of the other gods.
I think it's definitely possible. I am of the personal opinion, and here I go bringing up Solus, because DAI kind of presents Rift magic as like something that was just created because of the tear in the veil. I kind of have the theory that all the Evanuris could do that branch of magic because of their connection to the Fade and whatnot. And so maybe there's just that connection there, and June just has a better one. But there's so much, like, with how important like creation and crafting is in the Androstian religion, to verses that it's not emphasized. Maybe June isn't as emphasized as much because maybe it has nothing to do with the other Evanuris and has everything to do with the Dalish people wanting to further distance themselves from anything that connects them to the Androstian religion. Because I think there's an argument to be made if you're going to make someone like these Evanuris who are the maker. June is a stronger argument than Elgar'nan, in my opinion.
I think that's fair. And I definitely see, I think that the desire to want to separate yourselves away from another group of people, especially a group of people that is oppressing you, is a very natural tendency and desire. And so I think that explanation for it makes a lot of sense. But I also think, just going back a little bit to like June's domain, I think the idea that his role is something that cannot be understood today, something I wanted to bring up earlier but forgot, was Uthenera. You know, the elves cannot do Uthenera anymore. They don't know how to do it. The knowledge has been lost. And furthermore, they don't live as long, so they can't do it. And so I wonder if he is the god over Uthenera, over that process. Maybe he created it. Maybe he taught it to the elves. And I can imagine that there would be a lot of things involved in Uthenera, like building those temples, building the materials and the things needed to physically contain the bodies and, you know, the magic and all of the things. So I can imagine, okay, there are a lot of different ways and things that need to be created that go into this that might explain some of the, oh, well, it's smithing and it's creating and it's all of these other things too. So I think that could be one explanation for it as well. But that's definitely the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of something in the lore that simply cannot be understood today.
Something that I was thinking about also was, what if there's not much known about him because I can't think of a better way to word this other than what I'm about to say, which is really dumb. He was really scary. It's kind of like how we don't have the original word for bear, because if you spoke about a bear, it would bring it. I mean, does that make sense? Yeah. Like, just like if you talked about whatever his domain was, like, it's this very big bad thing and we don't want to think about it. And so like, he just kind of, you know, we don't really talk about him anymore other than like, oh, he does crafts in this secret third thing that we're not going to think about, you know?
Yeah, I think that makes sense too. There's just so many options that it could be.
Mm-hmm. Which sort of on that. So we were talking about the Valisline and stuff, and I don't know if it was on purpose or for whatever reason, but the two Valisline from Inquisition, I think, look a lot like Fenris's markings in Dragon Age 2. Very, very particularly, the both designs of the Valisline have like this neck piece, and like the flanges kind of point different directions, but it has like the same like line weight and thickness and kind of the overall designs. And you can't actually see it in game, but it is in all the concept art and in the comics. But Fenris has like these 3 dots on his forehead, and like Juné's primary design is covered in dots. So it would make sense that there's some sort of connection there. We learn more about how Fenris got his markings, which was actually retcon, but we're gonna breeze past that. In the what do they call the collection? The Wraiths of Minrathous or something like that is what Nunzio and Christina decided to call the series as a whole.
Yeah, that
Wraiths of
sounds
Tevinter?
vaguely familiar. It's Wraiths of something. Let me
I
Google
want to
it.
say, I think it was Tevinter, maybe. It's one of those, like, that's what they called it. I don't know if
Yes,
it's actually
it's
published
Tevinter.
anywhere. Okay, there it is. Yeah, so in that sort of thing, we kind of learn how he got the markings. So she was placed in this coffin or sarcophagus, I think they actually call it, that has a headdress that looks very similar to what I believe now is Gillen on. And then they put a sword in the front of it and absorbs the sword made of lyrium, and that's how Fenris got his markings. And so I've always wondered, like, before this comic came out, before I was pretty solid that the headpiece was Galenon, so I thought it was Juné for the longest time. And so I thought maybe this was how like Juné made slaves, because Fenris had all like these weird connections to the powers, the lyrium, and whatever. And like that's what there's a bunch of weird connections between Fenris's markings and then Valisline itself. And then I was thinking like, well, what if it's actually just the sword made out of lyrium that created those markings? Because later on, when they put a red lyrium sword, it creates completely different markings. So maybe that sort of was connected to Juné in some way. And I don't know. There's a lot of questions here, even with Juné and Fenris and this lyrium sarcophagus thing. And like, I kind of don't even know what to make of it, or if they're even going to explain what that is.
I mean, we can also go so far as to wonder if, and I don't know if we know, maybe Juné created red lyrium. And the rest of the Evanuris, like they were down with regular lyrium. I don't know. That's just an idea I had while listening to you. I have nothing in the lore to back that up. Just a fun little thought. I don't know if we even know the lore behind how red lyrium was created, but we
Not
do
at
know
all, no.
we do have the red lyrium sarcophagus that creates is it the Red Wraith, what they call him in the comics?
Yeah, it's like Shrialis is the guy's real name or something like that. But yeah, it's like I don't think they name it because he just kind of like appears and he's like big monster man.
Yeah.
It was scary.
Yes.
Well, it's really interesting because we know that, like, obviously from Bianca's quest, that red lyrium contains the blight. And whatever, that the blight can only infect living things, so lyrium is alive, we would deduce. And so, but it would make sense that maybe there has yet to be a connection between like the Evanuris lore and lyrium in general. Like it's very much a dwarven thing.
Well, there is the lyrium mine processing center in Trespasser that's covered in elven.
That's true. But I wonder, because there is an association with Andriel perhaps bringing the blight back from the void. And so maybe there was something about lyrium being infected. Maybe as the god of craft, that Juné had some sort of like influence on early lyrium mines or something like that.
Yeah, maybe.
Anything is possible at this point.
Yeah,
This is why I kind of want Solus and Fenris to meet, because I would wonder what Solus would have to say about Fenris's powers and his markings, though I'm not sure if either of them would survive said encounter.
I get along swimmingly, actually. No.
Maybe.
No, they both hate, like, look, he would meet, so okay, I guess it depends on if he knows he's soulless dread wolf, or if he just thinks he's some dude. If he's just some dude, like, yeah, mages suck, but at the same time, like, oh, we both hate slavery, my man, and like give a good handshake.
True.
Yeah,
I think under very limited circumstances they could be besties. But most of the circumstances, I do think they would not be besties.
But I do want to go back to Fenris's markings, because I think if there is a connection to June in this, it kind of is that missing piece, because like of seeing June being scary, like this terrible monstrositous thing that would come from maybe the things that he gave humanity. Because up until in this episode, we've talked about he's given a lot of good things to humanity, or elven kind, the people.
Mm-hmm.
If I can add one more thing, basis. I mean, we've basically gone over all of the hard facts, and there's a lot of theory too. If I could write down what I think his original domain was, I think he helped create mind-controlled slaves, and that the god of crafts and whatever is actually propaganda on, like, oh, he gave us jobs and taught us how to do helpful things, when like that's not really it. He enslaved you. That's that, because I think all the elven gods are going to end up being kind of like twisted, even Mythal in a way. So that is my guess on where June is going, and if I would put money down on that.
I think that makes total sense. And I agree with you. I think that all of the elven gods are not quite what they seem. And we might get some twists to their characters in the next game. But that's one of the reasons I like Elgranon, because he's been pretty much solely depicted as like the bad father the whole time. So I am interested in how he can be good.
That would be really funny if like he's known as an asshole of all time, but then you actually meet him and he like was actually
like,
pretty chill.
Yeah.
He's a grandpa in sweater and pajamas, like reading the newspaper in his chair,
who just has bouts of rage. Like I get it, frankly. Like I get it.
He's Mr. Rogers with a drinking problem.
Rage,
absolutely. With a drinking problem.
So really quickly, let's talk about our side character, which is a very interesting character. And I know that this season, we've been doing like side characters that kind of tie into the actual character that we're discussing on the episode. This one doesn't really, it's just another elf. So anyway, we're talking about Strife for our side character today, really quickly. And if you're listening, you might not know about this character because he doesn't appear in any of the games yet. But Strife is an elf who appears in Tevinter Nights and a short story titled Ruins of Reality and the Missing comic, which I think makes him a very prime candidate to be a companion in Dreadwolf, just frankly. So technically, Strife is a city elf originally from Starkhaven, but he did join a Dalish clan, and that was Clan Morlin. And he is described as very tall with silver hair. In the comics, he is depicted as a dark-skinned elf. So if he is portrayed in Dreadwolf, and if anyone at BioWare is still listening to this podcast, please, for the love of God, do not whitewash this man. I beg of you. Please. Please don't. You've done it too many times and we can't handle it. We just can't. But another cool thing about Strife is that he's not super young. He is around the age of 50 in 944 Dragon. So if he does become a companion, he would be on the older side, which I personally adore. I like that. I love having an older companion. I think your party always needs to have an older companion to give you a little bit of wisdom. And I do think Strife would be a good balance of assertiveness and that wisdom. So
romance option. Would you want to be a sexy grandpa?
Hell yeah.
Sexy grandpa.
I mean, I definitely think it would be, I mean, I do think it's weird to have like an older companion and then like a very young looking protagonist for sure. But like, you can always role play that. It doesn't matter. Like, whatever. That's to the people who are playing the game to decide. But I think it's great to have as much representation as possible. And I love that. That's one of the things I love about Dragon Age Inquisition, especially because like Cassandra is not young. Blackwall is not young. We have a lot of the companions who are older, maybe not like old or grandparents, but like who are not in their teenage years, not in their 20s, who have had life experience, who have made mistakes, who have lived their lives and learned from it, hopefully. And in the case of Blackwall, is trying to fix his mistakes. So I appreciate that as a companion, as a character. I think it makes a better story. And I think Strife is a character that absolutely could provide that as well in another game.
Yeah. No, Three Trees to Midnight being the very first story of Tevinter Nights, like he, what was the other guy's name in that story? The
Myrian,
yes,
something like that.
He, with him being kind of like, whiny and doesn't know what's going on, Strife was a much needed relief of like, kid, we're gonna get through this. Just trust me. I don't know. I liked him. He was nice. I would totally be down for like that companion of like, look, crazy stuff's going on, but we're gonna get through this. That kind of a grandpa-esque figure.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So,
which I could see that serving kind of like similar to like how Varric would in like the other games.
Yeah, or even Wynn, I think. Maybe like a little bit less judgmental, but I mean, she is kind of judgmental, especially through romance. So.
Oh, totally. But I love that about her.
Yeah, same. Like she's made her own mistakes. She has every right to be judgmental, but yeah, I think that he could be a similar character to both of them, in that kind of like wisdom parental figure almost. But yeah. So let's get into what we do know about him. So you did mention Three Trees to Midnight, which we have that one and then two others, but we do know also, before we get into that, we know that he basically got kicked out of Starkhaven because he was standing up for elves who were being mistreated. And so, as you can imagine, he got into some trouble with the humans, obviously. So he did have to leave Starkhaven for good because he assaulted a human guard who was beating elven children. To that, I say good job, props, 10 out of 10. But so anyway, he leaves and was basically living in the woods when his Dalish clan finds him, and that's how he joins their clan. So anyway, in Three Trees to Midnight, this is one of my favorite stories in Tevinter Nights. I think it's very interesting because we get a glimpse of conflict that is beyond the interpersonal. Like it is interpersonal, but it's also a lot more than that. It's also systemic. So the story follows a group of Qunari taking prisoners after the fall of Ventus. Strife is a main character, like we just discussed, and he is shackled to a Tevinter mage named Myrian or Mirian. We don't know, but they're instantly antagonistic to one another as Myrian kind of strikes first and calls Strife a knife ear. And so Strife reacts by calling him a lazy shem. And the Qunari leader, who is the Bastar, reprimands them for arguing. And what happens next is why I love Strife. Like, this was the moment where I was like, you are my new favorite character. Because Strife responds by calling him bastard, obviously, which I think shows his personality of like, he's not afraid to stand up to unjust people. He's not afraid to stand up to leaders who are like, power tripping. He is aggressive and assertive, but also in a way of like, I'm low key. Like, I'm not going to go out here and just like start beating you up, but like, I'm going to be this person that is an immovable target almost. Like, you will have to go through me to get to the people behind me kind of thing. So I love him already right off the bat. But a lot of things happen in this chapter, especially if you love Qunari lore. Go read this chapter because there's a lot of implications for the next game. But just to summarize, Strife and Myrian end up saving each other's lives and they escape, at least attempt to. They do make it to the woods where they meet another elf named Ireland, who's also from Strife's clan, who's also been in the missing. But they do end up having to fight the Qunari, and they, along with another Qunari, they do kill the Bastar leader. We learn a little bit about the conflict with the Qun. It could lead to a Qunari civil war. We don't really know. But by the end, Strife and Myrian, they're not quite friends. Like, I would not go so far to say that they're friends, but I think they both understand that they owe each other their lives. And so that there's at least a little bit of respect there for each other, because there have been moments where Strife helped Myrian, Myrian helped Strife, vice versa.
Yes.
And then the next story we have is called Ruins of Reality. And this is a short story, and I can't remember the year it came out, but it was one of the short stories released on Dragon Age Day.
I think it was one of the first times they released short stories.
I think so. I want to say it was like 2020 or something. Like, it was before we were content creating for Dragon Age 2. So it was a little bit ago. But basically what happens is a relic of the Dalish clan Morlin, which has been handed down over generations, starts rewriting itself, just kind of its own volition. And it's starting to describe ruins that hold a powerful artifact in Arlathan Forest, the scene of every crime. So Strife is sent on a mission to retrieve this artifact, and he realizes pretty quickly that something's gone wrong in the forest, that the landscape has stretched, time works differently, and he sees a mirror image of himself. He does also find the relic, which is interestingly enough, crystal Hala figurine held by a statue of Gilinan. So while Strife works as bait, basically, for these angry Sylvans, Ireland, she comes back again, and she's shape-shifting to retrieve the artifact. And so together they're able to save it, and they go back to camp. And then the last one that we have from Strife is a couple issues of the Missing comic, which just came out in 2023. And so we have Strife, Ireland, and a few other elves meeting Varric and Harding at the entrance of Arlathan Forest. And Varric is basically like, oh, we just want you to like give us entry into the forest. And Strife is like, you're not going to make it if I don't go with you. So we'll just work together on this one. And so they go to find the Crucius Stone. But anyway, so they end up having to go through several different like trials. And then the last and most difficult one is they have to take down a Vartaral. And then after they reach the temple, they do realize that the stone has already been stolen by Solus or Fenharel, which is when Varric tells Strife and Ireland that Solus is Fenharel, and they're both like shocked. And the thing that is interesting to me about this is that means that Solus has not revealed himself to all the Dalish, at least at the point that the Missing is set in. So that's interesting. And maybe he's revealed himself to like all of the keepers, but not all of the like other regular clan members. I don't know. But I do think that that's pretty significant.
Yeah, I guess I never thought he contacted the Dalish, because he low-key hated the Dalish.
True.
He was very aggressive with Llewellyn of like, the Dalish are the worst things that ever happened, but you're okay. You're the best thing that can. Like, it was like, it's a little... I don't know about that.
True.
Okay.
That's true. But I can also see him wanting to like be the elven savior and correct them and be like, here's why everything you're doing is wrong. Come and follow me and I'll teach you how to do it the right way.
But I think he tried that. And then he talked about how like he got ran out by the Dalish or something at one point.
Oh, that's true. That's true. So, but I can see him doing it time after time.
Yeah, he keeps trying.
Like, I just, yeah. Fair. That's very fair. But I do think, I agree with you. I do think that the primary people that Solus is going to be targeting are city elves, because they're the ones that, frankly, are the most downtrodden by humans. And so I think they're the most likely to join him.
I think it might, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
if I remember correctly, a lot of the Dalish actually are descendant from the royalty of the Arlathan, and because they were able to do whatever. And then a lot of the people in the human cities were people who were captured and enslaved by Tevinter when the fall of Arlathan happened. So the people that he was really trying to save are really the descendants of, or flip that. The descendants of the people he tried to save are the ones in the human cities. And
that's interesting. I have never heard that before. So that's fascinating to me. I definitely I can see how that would be true. I also though think, in the lore, there's some, I don't remember what it comes from, but there's something that says like city elves, they have a tendency to be Androstian. Like there's more of them that are part of the chantry. And I think that's just proximity of living to humans. But I can also see how a woman who became a god, similar to some of the elven gods, who went through slavery like they have gone through, can be an appealing person to worship. But
yeah, and that was almost like, that was, I think, a major key part of the Jaws of Hakon DLC, because you have someone from the Dales who also worshipped Andraste into the Pantheon. He was like, yeah, great, another one, bring her in.
Yes, which we'll talk about in just a few weeks on the podcast.
Well, there you go. You got to tune in next time.
Yes. So just back to Strife for a little bit. The last little trivia thing that I want to bring up is that the interesting thing is that in Tevinter Nights, he has no Valisline, but by the missing, he does. And specifically, he does have the Valisline of Andriel, I think. Yes.
I think so,
and
yeah.
So, maybe his tribe, his Dalish tribe, like they encouraged him to do that, or maybe he wanted to do that. We don't really know. We just know that that is a change that occurs from Tevinter Nights to the missing. So that's about all I have for Strife. Do y'all have any thoughts on him? Anything you like, dislike, want to see him in Dreadwolf, etc.?
I mean, yeah, I'd love to see him again. There's I don't know. Most of the side characters they've introduced us to are like pretty solid, especially in Tevinter Nights. Like there's maybe only a handful of people in Tevinter Nights. They're like, they should stay there. We're good. Like I don't really want to see the squid monster. Like not that it was poorly written. I just don't want to see it.
I'm 100% with you on that one.
I'm okay with that one.
Yes,
but yeah, I love to see, and Myrian, whatever his name is, see the squirrely kid. We can see how much he's grown, because like if that happened like at the beginning of, did it say a year when that started? I forget. Was that closer to the 40s or
I don't remember. I don't remember at all.
Because it could possibly be like 10 years since that event happened. Honestly, it's been so much time in real life and in lore that who knows where they are now.
Yep.
So
I won't make a comment about that one, but it has been a long time.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a really fun episode. Thank you so much, Caitie, for joining us. I know we've gone over a little bit on our time.
That's fine.
But is there anything either of you would like to talk about in regards to June or Strife before we wrap it up?
I only got the shit post of what if they're the same person?
No,
we don't know. We don't know.
We don't. There is always the 0.0001% chance that it's possible.
This is. I know some people generally like it, but it's like one of my least favorite fan theories. But this is how I feel like when people say like Sarah is Andrel. No, she's not. No, she's not.
Yeah, I think the fan theory is funny just because Sarah hates elf stuff so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting, but probably not.
No. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Caitie, if you want to plug for our listeners any of the things you have going on, especially like your YouTube channel, now would be the time.
Yeah, so if you don't know who I am, my name is Caitie, and I am Ghil Dirthalen, and I run the Ghil Dirthalen YouTube channel on, you'll never guess where, YouTube. I'm kind of like paused a lot of stuff now because I have a crazy life. I even have videos that are in the works that are at least a month late at this point. But I'm going to start Because apparently this might be the year, guys. This might be the year. I say this every year, but that might be right this time. I'm going to try to start making more stuff and get back into the swing of things. And yeah, we can reconnect again and talk about Dreadwolf. What about that?
Yeah, imagine putting
new
on my
content.
clown makeup.
Yeah, no kidding. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on the show. We'll definitely have to chat again if we get any late breaking elven lore news in the next couple months, hopefully with the summer announcements. But yeah, I think that's all we've got for the episode, Austin. So if you kind of want to close us out, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here with us, Caitie. It was great to talk with us. Thanks.
Likewise, yeah.
Yeah, we love talking about Dragon Age. We love putting on our tinfoil hats and theorizing. So thanks for being here. And thank you all for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. You can find us on Twitter at DALorecast.
If you have any lore questions, topics to unpack, or side character suggestions, join our Cups Podcasting and More Discord server. It's easily the best place on the internet. You can also support us financially through our Patreon. You can find us there on patreon.com/DragonAgeLorecast.
The Dragon Age Lorecast is part of the Robots Radio Network. For more information about the Robots Radio Network, join the Discord server via the link in our episode description.
If you enjoyed the show or learned something new today, please subscribe, leave us a review, and join the Patreon. And if you enjoyed our intro and outro music, give a big thank you to Pipeman Studios. Thank you, Pipeman. Thanks again for listening to the Dragon Age Lorecast. We'll see you next time.